Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboy Time Story, we ride the stories of the West Campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The wind did not just cross the Dakota prairie, it scraped it clean. Snow rode the gusts in hard little pellets that stung the cheeks and hissed along the ground. At the Bad River trading post, 4 wagons hunched in the open like tired beasts. Men cursed prices and weather. A buffalo coat swung wide in the doorway when Silas Drummond shouldered in to argue for flour. Rowan Hale did not have a plan. She had a pulse. She had a body built long and strong, a body men measured like lumber. She felt the wind through the wagon canvas and smelled alkali dust and cold iron. When Silas turned his back and raised his voice at the storekeeper, she moved. She slid off the bench and hit the frozen earth heavy. The boots bit her ankles wrong. She did not look at the post or the men or the sky. She ran. A warning shot cracked behind her and bounced off the rock in her chest. She found the low wash of a dry arroyo and fell into it, head down, hands out, snow needles jabbing at her face. The land sloped and stole her breath. Mesquite thorns ripped cloth. Her dress tore and flapped against her thigh. The world went purple at the edges. She hit a sagging fence at a dead run. The barbed wire caught her palm and did what wire does. She hissed, looked at the slice, and then gripped the top strand anyway and followed it. The posts creaked in the wind. Blood made the snow look older. She tried to stand straight, and the right ankle failed. She crawled the last few yards to a juniper post half buried in drifted snow and let the cold fold over her. The wire hummed in the wind like a taut string. She closed her eyes and let the sound carry her down. Eben Pike found her after dark. His lantern threw a small circle of honeylight over gray world. He had gone out of habit checking the line his mother set years ago, a foolish errand in a storm, but habit had ruled his days since spring took her breath and left him a house and a prayer. He saw a shape at the end post. In the snow, it looked like a calf turned wrong. He lowered the lantern. Fingers, a face, eyes closed under wet straw hair. She was big, bigger than he was by a span. He set the lantern down and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. There, thin and stubborn. He hooked the lantern to his belt and set his shoulder under her ribs. She was all bone and work weight. He was not. The first step buckled him. The second set a rhythm. He took the long, slow path toward the square of rock and light on the small rise. The door fought him. He made it give. The cabin was stone-stacked by a woman who did not trust weather. It held a hearth blackened by juniper smoke, a cot with a neat quilt, a scrub table, a coffee pot that remembered better mornings. Eben went to his knees on the dirt floor with the stranger across his legs. His face burned with the wrong kind of heat. He wriggled free and dragged her to the rug by the fire. Her clothes were stiff with ice. The choice stood in the open between him and the cross nailed above the door. He cut the laces of her ruined boots with his knife and pulled them off, blue feet and all. He did not touch more. He fetched the quilt and wrapped her up until only the line of her jaw showed. He fed split juniper to the grate and coaxed flame until it talked. He waited. His breathing eased. The wind climbed the stones and sang at the single window. He looked at her hands. The right palm showed a neat rag of red where wire had kissed it. He fetched a strip of clean cloth, dipped it in warm water, and bound it without fuss. He kept his eyes on the task and not on her face. He could feel heat behind him at the cot, the shape of a life his mother built. He did not look. She woke like a skittish mare. Quilt jerked, eyes bright and empty of recognition. She had the fire at her back in a breath shoulder to the stone's teeth set. He lifted his hands. Open. I mean no harm, ma'am. Eben Pike. This is my place. His voice sounded to him like a boy trying on a hat too large. She scanned the room and counted. Door, window, poker 3 feet off. 1 man, 1 cross. She breathed through her teeth. The smell of coffee cut through the cold. I found you on the fence, he said. Storm is a mean one. Her voice came low and rough. Where is he? Who? The man with the buffalo coat? I do not know him. He moved to the table and ladled thin broth from the pot he had kept simmering on a stubborn fire all day. He slid the bowl toward her along the boards until he could reach no farther. He did not step in closer. She watched him a long beat. Then she slid along the hearth, took the bowl, and tipped it. The broth lit her throat with pain that felt like life. She kept her eyes on him over the rim. He wiped up a spill that was not there. Thank you, she said. It sounded like metal laid down. She set the bowl on the stone and flexed the bandaged hand. The cloth browned. You cut on my wire, he said. It held. She looked past him. You pray much, Eben Pike? Yes. Her mouth quirked. Not a smile. Something like recognition. You call me ma'am again and I'll throw that bowl. He blinked. What should I call you? Rowan. He nodded. The name sat between them like a rock. He poured coffee and set the cup where the bowl had been. She smelled it and softened a hair. He went to the door. The latch clicked twice under his thumb. Habit. He pulled his thin blanket from a peg and laid it over the table. He did not ask her for the cot. He did not dare. Storm will bury the road, he said without turning. This place holds heat if I keep the fire fed. You can stay by the hearth. I will take the table. One night, she said. He heard the bargain inside the words. He nodded again. One night. He moved around her wide as if she were a stove still too hot to touch. He checked the seam at the window where frost crawled like lichen. Snow scratched the glass. When he knelt by the chair and folded his hands, the room shifted. Rowan watched his back bow and the small bones in his neck stand out. He did not hurry the words. They were the only words he believed he could say without lying. The firelight made a halo of sparks on the rough wood of the cross. Her breath slowed, her body did not. He stood at last and looked at the cot and then at the table and chose plank over mattress. He blew the lantern dark and left the room to the pulse of the fire. Rowan listened to the wind find every seam. She tasted iron in the back of her throat. Her right ankle throbbed slow and mean. She pulled the quilt closer with the bandaged hand. The cut stung. The scent of juniper smoke was sweet and green, a smell that did not belong to Silas. The floor under the rug was uneven. Her fingertips seeking purchase brushed metal at the rug's edge, a cool iron ring set flush in a square of plank. She left it alone. Eben lay on his back and counted his breath. He looked at the dark shape at the hearth and felt the young ache move under his ribs like a trapped thing. He pressed his tongue to his teeth. He squeezed his eyes shut. His mother's voice arrived without footsteps. He waited for sleep and found only prayer. It came out quiet. Lord, deliver me from the flesh. Rowan opened her eyes in the glow and did not close them again. The wind calmed by morning. The cabin held a weak pocket of heat around the hearth. Rowan woke to coals pulsing under ash, and the smell of yesterday's coffee gone bitter in the pot. The table creaked. Eben's blanket was neatly folded on it. The door latch clicked and stuck when she tried it. Snow pressed high outside like a wall. She found her boots near the hearth leather split. On the cot lay a pair of denim trousers and a flannel shirt, both small, both clean. A bundle of thick socks sat on top. Eben had left them without a word. She listened. The sound came faint through the stones. A shovel blade. Short breaths. The denim pinched her hips and stopped above her ankles. The flannel pulled across her shoulders. The socks warmed her feet quick and honest. She tied a rope around the waist to keep the pants up. The rope bit. It did not care. She built the fire high and opened the door. The world had gone white and near. Eben stood in a cut he had made through a drift that reached his ribs. He wore a cap not enough for the cold and a coat that had seen better men. Frost clung to his eyebrows. He looked up and stopped. His eyes hit the way the shirt stretched and skittered off, face full of color. Morning, he said. Snow is a wall, she said. The cattle need feed. Then we dig. They worked and said little. The shovel rang against crust with a small, sharp music. The air burned Rowan's lungs. Eben lifted a sack of feed and his knees wobbled. She took it with one hand and carried it through the cut to the barn. He stared and then went back to the shovel as if it had asked him a question he could answer. The sod roof had taken too much weight. Wet leaked through the seam above the stalls and dripped in a slow, sad line onto the packed earth. Eben set a ladder that did not trust its joints. He climbed and braced his boots and reached for the hammer. Rowan stood solid beneath him and handed up tools and squares of tarred canvas. Their gloved fingers brushed once. He jerked as if the leather had turned to flame, almost lost his balance, and then steadied with a curse, swallowed small. The light fell the way winter light does, flat and quick. They ate by the fire at the one table, beans, bacon, biscuits. He managed his fork like a man afraid of noise. She watched him for a while and then said, "Stop calling me ma'am." He looked confused and careful. "What should I say, Rowan?" He nodded and set his fork down in a line with the knife. He did not smile. He did not pray over the food. Later he knelt a long while. She watched his shoulders rise and fall. The cross above the door took the firelight and gave it back in a dull glow. On the third morning the sky turned a pale, hard blue. The cold had teeth. Rowan took a small bar of soap and a thin towel from a peg and told him, "I'm going to the creek." He was mending a harness with cracked fingers. He did not look up. "Do not go far. The water runs fast in thaw." Rowan found a bend shielded by cottonwood's trunks, thin and gray branches scribbling against the sky. The creek grabbed ice and threw it into small skirts along the banks. She set the towel on a flat stone and stripped quick. Air knifed her skin. She stepped into the water and hissed. The shock ran to her spine. She scrubbed dirt and sweat and smoke from her arms, from her neck, from the long scar down her thigh that a plow had written years back. The sun had just enough strength to make steam at her skin. Eben came along the creek with a coil of rope and his eyes on the washouts. He parted a screen of brush and stopped like a man shot. For a second he could not breathe. The world narrowed to wet skin, pale back the line of muscle, the shape of a woman that did not look like a picture in a book. It looked alive. He made a sound and his hands forgot the rope. It fell and slapped the mud. Rowan turned hands to her chest by instinct and saw him. He fled without a word. He ran until the cabin wall took him, and he leaned there chest heaving, then bolted the door as if water could cross land and knock. She dressed at the creek with her jaw set and went back slow. Frost formed in her hair. She stood at the door long enough to feel the cold bite her toes, then hit the wood with her fist. The latch scraped. The door opened. He would not meet her eyes. He burned the biscuits and dropped his tin plate. Beans went across the planks like dark stars. He said sorry 3 times for things that were not the point. After he took his blanket and made a bed by the door and turned his face to the wall. Rowan stood in the middle of the cabin and let the heat from the hearth find her back. She looked at the iron ring set flush in the floor by the rug. She looked at him, shoulders tight under the blanket. She went to him. "Look at me," she said. He did not. "Look at me," she said again, softer. He sat up. His knees came to his chest by habit. He held himself small on purpose. "Down at the creek," she said, "you looked at me like a snake, like rot." His throat worked. "I should not have been there." "That is not the answer." He pressed his palms to his eyes. When he took them away, they were wet. "I am afraid of me," he said, "not of you. My mother taught me that the body is a snare. I have not been with a woman. I aim to keep clean." The room heard him breathe. Rowan stood still a moment. Her anger had edges. It softened and left weight. "You think wanting is dirt," she said. "You did not touch me. You ran." He nodded like a boy who wants to be spared. A sound cut across the quiet. A calf bleated from the dark, then the thin, wild yip of coyotes, a chorus that lifted the hair on their arms. Eben stood and reached for the rifle above the hearth. The lantern's glass winked as he lit it. "They will pick the small one clean," he said. "Then we watch," she said. They sat inside the barn door on a pile of clean hay with the lantern between them. Cold walked in and took a seat too. Breath from the cows made white ropes in the air. The coyotes moved at the fence line like gray water. The lantern flame ticked a small heart. Rowan pulled her knees up and hugged them. The chill went into bone. Eben shook with the kind of shiver that starts at the spine and climbs. He drew his blanket tight, and it did not help. "You are shaking more than I am," she said. It came out like a joke that was not trying hard. "I am all right," he said, and failed to sound like it. She leaned into him. Not a move for romance, a move for heat. Her shoulder met his. The blanket bridged the gap. He went still as a board, then breathed, then trembled in a new way. His hand hovered and then landed on hers, where it rested on her knee. His palm was small and torn from work and prayer. Her hand was big and warm and scarred. They sat like that. The cattle settled. The coyotes gave up and called to the moon from the ridge. Dawn thinned the dark. The lantern made one last sigh. Rowan turned her head. His face was near, eyes open and raw. She could see the want in them, and the fear built on top like a poor roof. She closed the distance and kissed him. It was not sweet, it was sure. He made a sound and kissed back with the hunger of someone who has saved a thing and now dares to hold it. Then he pulled away so fast the hay squealed under him. He stood and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. His breath came rough. "No," he said, "I cannot." He picked up the word sin like a stone and held it against his chest. He said he was sorry. He said it again. He stood shaking and could not look at her. The barn felt like a church emptied of people and left to the wind. Rowan rose. She brushed hay from her borrowed pants. She looked at him one last time and did not try to break the thing that had him. Her voice was quiet. "I will not force you," she said. "I need something real tonight." She went out into the weak light and crossed the yard. The cabin took her in, and the hearth did not. She pulled a blanket from the cot and made a bed in the cold corner on the floor by the dead coals. She lay on her side facing the wall and listened to her own breath until it slowed. Eben stayed in the barn with the rifle across his knees. He sat on a crate and watched the light arrange itself along the beam above the stalls. He did not sleep. He listened to the last of the night into his head. It did not quiet. A bird called once from the cottonwoods in a voice like string on a nail. When the light was thin as skim milk, he stood and walked into the yard. The woodpile waited by the chopping block. A round of knotty juniper squatted there the size of a barrel. He wanted clean. He wanted a penance that spoke with its own mouth. He set the round straight and lifted the axe. The first hit stuck and sang. He wrenched the handle. He hit again. The thud rolled through the cabin. Rowan opened her eyes to that sound, heavy and helpless and certain. The axe rose and fell, and the yard took every blow. The axe rose and fell until the sound turned dull. Rowan stepped into the yard with her breath making a thin white banner in the cold. Eben's chest shone with sweat that the air tried to turn to glass. His hands were slick and torn. He swung again, and the blade bit and stuck. "You will split yourself, not the wood," she said. He stared at the round and breathed through his teeth. He could not seem to see her. Shame blurred his eyes. "Had to," he said. "Had to what?" He swallowed. His lips had no color. "Make it stop." She looked at the round, at the frost at his hands. The world had gone quiet except for the small noise of his breath. She stepped close and took his left hand, the one not gripping the axe. It shook under her fingers. "It is only a hand," she said. She lifted it and pressed his palm flat to her waist to the rope she had tied over his pants that now held her. "Only us." Something unclenched in his face. The axe slid from his right hand and sank into the mud with a soft sound. He watched his own palm like it belonged to someone else. Heat came into his eyes that was not shame. It looked like relief trying to stand. "Come inside," she said. He followed without words. Mud marked the stones. The cabin smelled of old smoke and the last of the broth. She shut the door and set the latch. For a breath he just stood and held himself very still as if the room might tilt. Rowan faced him in the dim. She unbuttoned the flannel slow and clean, one button, then another cloth, moving against skin. She pulled it free and let it fall. The linen shift beneath was thin from years. He did not look away this time. He stood as if a line had been drawn and then crossed. He took off his coat, his shirt, his hands clumsy and sure at once. They reached for each other in a way that was more work than grace. Shoulders knocked. The cot squeaked. His breath hitched when his palm found the line of her shoulder. Her mouth was warm and direct. He was careful, then hungry, then careful again. She told him yes when he asked without sound. The hearth held a low bed of coals that glowed like eyes. The world outside was only white and wind. When it was done, they lay with the quilt pulled up and their legs tangled, and the quiet that filled the room had a different weight. Eben's face was wet, and he did not seem to notice. He pressed his nose to her hair and tried to breathe right. She traced the last knuckle of his left hand with her thumb. The cuts looked less angry in the red light. He slept for a while, a true sleep that did not fight him. Rowan watched the ceiling stones and counted the cracks. She felt the ache of tired muscles and the soft, deep ache under that. She slept too, not long enough to forget her own name for a breath. They woke with the light gray and honest at the window. Eben got up first and set coffee to boil. He moved with a steadiness that surprised him. He looked over and found her eyes on him. He brought her a tin cup and did not look away when she took it. She sat up in the quilt and drank. The steam lit her face. "Steam." "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. He went to the window and rubbed a clear spot on the frost with his sleeve. He frowned and set the cup down without drinking. Rowan. She was already moving. She came to the glass and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. The yard told a story. In the soft places where the wind had not scoured, crescents sank deep. Not mule, not cow, 4 sets. They had passed close and not in any hurry. Over the ridge a bright fleck caught in the weak sun and winked. "Silas," she said. The name had no heat. It was a flat weight in the room. He looked at the hearth and the rug and the iron ring set flush in the plank. He turned to her. His voice came out steady. "Trust me," he said. She did not like the iron ring. The dark below it smelled like cellar apples and damp. She did not like the thought of vanishing under a floor while men looked for her above it. He knelt, hooked his fingers into the ring, and lifted. Cold air breathed up from the square mouth. Wood creaked. "I will not let him take you," he said. She held his eyes a long breath. She took the blanket from the cot and climbed down. The earth under her boots felt close and packed like a held breath. He lowered the door and dragged the rug back until it sat right. The cabin went dim. She sat on a sack of potatoes and wrapped the blanket over her shoulders and pressed her palm to the dirt to feel it as if the ground could tell her what men would not. Boots on the porch came slow and full of certainty. The latch clicked. Knuckles met wood. The sound carried through the planks like a worked nail. Eben opened. The yard held 4 figures. Silas sat his horse as if it were his living room chair. The beard shone with oil. 2 men with flat eyes held their reins slack. The 4th rider had a star pinned to a weathered coat. He looked tired and hard and decent in a way that did not feel like comfort. "Morning," Eben said. The deputy tipped his hat. "Amos Kittredge," he said. "We got business." Silas smiled without showing teeth. "Where is my wife?" he said. He held up a folded paper with a stain at one corner, signed and witnessed. Eben kept one hand on the doorframe to keep his own hand from shaking. "There is no consent on that paper," he said. "That paper is a purchase." Silas let the smile die. "Mind what you call it," he said. "Mind what you are doing, boy." Deputy Kittredge looked at Silas. He looked at the paper. He looked past Eben into the cabin where the fire sat low and the cot was unmade. He did not step over the threshold. The wind lifted a corner of his coat and showed the metal at his hip. He shifted his jaw, then spoke as if he had done this too many times. "We can do this without trouble," he said. "You seen a woman came through." Eben kept his face still. "No," he said. "No one comes here." The deputy's eyes moved once to the floor as if the stone itself might tell on a man. The rug looked like a rug. The room smelled like coffee that had gone wrong and juniper smoke. Outside, a horse stamped and jingled. Silas leaned forward in the saddle. "You think I do not know a lie when I hear one," he said. "You think a scrap of river trash got far in this cold." Deputy Kittredge turned his head slow and set his eyes on Silas until the man leaned back again. The deputy spoke quiet. "Enough," he said. Silas breathed through his nose and then worked his shoulders like the coat had got tight. He tucked the paper into his vest and tapped it twice. "I will be back," he said, and grinned with no humor. "With weight." Kittredge gave Eben a look that held a thought he did not say out loud. Then he put his hat back on right and touched his heel to his horse. The group moved off in a line that looked more like a decision than a ride. Hoofbeats softened quick in the drifted yard. In the cellar, the sound came like thunder through dirt. Rowan did not move until the small quiet returned. She watched the dust settle in a narrow beam of light that pushed between 2 floorboards. Her bandaged palm felt the boards for a tremor that was not there. The smell of potatoes went from comfort to crowd and back again. The rug scraped. The iron ring lifted. Eben's face appeared pale and focused. "Come up," he said. She climbed and stood in the same room like a person who had been remade 2 minutes older and 10 years different. Her eyes were bright. She looked at the door, then at his hands, then back to the door. He bolted it and then stood with his back against it and let out a long breath he did not know he had been holding. "He will not stop," she said. Eben looked at the cross and then at her. He did not reach for prayer like a shield. He moved the coffee pot aside and lifted the loose stone that hid a small tin box. The coins inside whispered like rain. He set the box back down and slid the stone home. He wiped his hands on his pants and left a mark. They did not speak for a long minute. The room had a pulse. The wind hunted the seams. A crow called once from the cottonwoods and went quiet. Light fell. Afternoon thinned to something smaller. A shadow crossed the window. Hooves came again, not many this time. The porch boards took a weight. The knock this time was not polite. It rattled the latch. A voice came through the door low and pleased. "Pike, bring her out." The knock rattled the latch like a spoon in a tin cup. Eben set his hand on the bar and looked at Rowan. She stood with the quilt around her shoulders, quiet as a wall. He lifted the bar and pulled the door. 4 riders in the yard. Steam rose from the horses and drifted in white ropes. Silas Drummond sat high and heavy. His beard shone like wet coal. 2 men with hard eyes and low belts flanked him. The 4th wore a star on his breast. The cold made his face look carved. "Morning," Eben said. The star lifted a hand. "Deputy Amos Kittredge," he said. "We got a matter to see to." Silas smiled without warmth and held up a folded sheet of paper. "Where is my wife?" he said. "Signed and witnessed. She belongs with me." Eben kept his voice even. "There is no wife here." Silas leaned forward in his saddle until the leather creaked. "You call me a liar. That what you are doing?" Kittredge did not look at Silas. He looked past Eben into the small room where the hearth glowed low and the cot showed a dent. He did not step over the threshold. His eyes moved once to the floor as if the boards could speak. Eben felt the iron ring in the plank like a mouth under his boots. He shifted so his heel sat over it and the rug lay flat. He let the cold sit on his skin a second, then said, "Paper is not consent." Silas's smile died for good. He folded the sheet, tucked it in his vest, and tapped the place with 2 fingers. "You hand her over," he said, "or I come back with the law that gives me what is mine." The deputy turned his head slow. "You have the law here," he said. His voice was tired and plain. "We will keep it quiet, Mr. Drummond." Rowan pushed the quilt aside and stepped to the door. Her bare feet touched the boards. The cold climbed fast. She held the iron poker in her hand like a road stake. She moved until she stood at the edge of the porch and looked level at men on horses. "You paid a price for me," she said. $20 in flour. My father took it. I did not speak. I did not sign. You put me in a wagon like feed." Silas set his jaw. You ran from a husband." She did not blink. "You bought a body. That is the truth of it." The hired men shifted in their saddles. Kittredge lowered his chin and looked at Silas. The wind lifted the edge of his duster and flashed the star and the pistol grip and then settled. Silas's face mottled. He pulled the paper out again and waved it without looking at it. "This is the only truth needed," he said. His hand went to his holster in the same breath. He drew and leveled the barrel at Rowan's chest. Eben had the rifle already set in the crook of his arm. He did not think about breath or sight or judgment. The sound in his ear was a dry snap. The butt sat right. The shot cracked across the yard. Silas rocked back with a grunt, and the pistol fired wild. The slug chewed wood from the porch post beside Rowan's shoulder and spit splinters into the air. She did not flinch. The hired guns had their hands on iron before they knew they meant to. Kittredge's own pistol was up and pointed at both in a line that did not waver. "You do not," he said. His voice was low and flat and took the heat from the air. Silas clutched his right shoulder. Dark spread through the buffalo coat like ink in water. He made a sound in his throat that was half curse and half hurt. The paper in his left hand fell into the snow and stuck there. Kittredge took in the porch post with the fresh bite of lead and the angle of Silas's arm and the way Rowan stood with the iron poker like something common. He holstered with one motion. He turned to Silas. "Burke Drummond," he said, then corrected himself without humor. "Silas Drummond. You are under arrest for attempted murder. You drew on an unarmed woman." Silas made a sound that wanted to be a laugh and failed. "She is mine," he said. He swayed. The horse shifted under him to keep him up. "She is a person," Kittredge said, and it sounded like a fact he did not say often. "You two," he told the hired men. "Off. Get him down. Tie that arm." They obeyed. The wages in a man's pocket change when a star speaks. They swung down and steadied Silas and cut a strip from a saddle blanket and bound the wound until the coat went black, but the bleed slowed. Kittredge stepped to the porch and stopped short of the step. He looked at Eben first, then at Rowan. The wind found the seam at his collar and lifted it. His eyes were a color that matched the sky. "That was a clean shot," he said. "He was going to kill her," Eben said. His voice had a shake that came late. Kittredge nodded once. He glanced at the paper in the snow but did not pick it up. He looked at the horses, at the hired men, at the slow, dark drip from Silas's sleeve. He made a choice where they could see it. "I take him in now," he said. "I will be gone from this yard for an hour, maybe a shade more. I will come back to check on the property." He held Eben's eyes and then Rowan's until the meaning sat in the cold between them. "I did not see what I saw." He turned and spoke over his shoulder without turning back. "Move." The small parade left with a creak of leather and a jingle of rings. Silas sagged in the saddle like a sack with a tear. The hired guns kept their hands quiet. The yard took the marks and went still. Eben lowered the rifle. He did not lean it by the door. He held it like a handle and moved fast. Rowan was already inside. She took the satchel from the peg, shoved the last of the bacon and a clean shirt into it, then the knife from the table, then the thick blanket rolled tight. Eben lifted the loose stone and took the tin. The coins talked. He slid the box open a finger. The number did not matter. He closed it and pushed it deep into his coat. They did not speak. The room no longer felt like a room. It felt like a box that had done its work. Eben shoved the door wide and left it so. Cold rushed the hearth and took the last red from the coals. In the tack room, the smell of oiled leather and old hay sat heavy. Eben threw a saddle on each mule and cinched blind with hands that knew the work, even while the mind ran. Rowan looped a small coil of barbed wire from a nail and tucked it under the flap of the satchel. The weight sat there with a dull comfort. She checked the rifle sling and the strap on the blanket twice. They led the mules to the creek bank rather than the trail. Hooves sank through the last soft snow to black mud and water underneath. Eben stepped into the shallow and let the chill take his shins. The mules followed with a grunt. Water erased what it could. They moved under cottonwoods where the wind did not reach. The branches made a scribble against the pale sky. The frost on them fell like fine ash when a bird leaped from one to the other. The yard fell behind. The cabin became a square of stone and shadow, and then nothing but the idea of a square. Rowan looked back once. The porch post showed the fresh white of torn wood. A small black dot in the snow marked where Silas had bled. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The door hung open and moved an inch in a small gust, and then was still. They kept to the creek until the bank steepened and the ice grew strange. Eben led the mules out where the water ran thin and left the bed for the low swale that cut behind the cottonwoods. He put his palm on Rowan's forearm and gave a small squeeze and then let go. No word sat close enough to say. The light went to the color of pewter. The air had a sound to it the ear calls quiet even when it is full of wind. The mules blew steam. Breath rose and hung and vanished. The first stars showed hard and cold. They crossed a fence line that had fallen and lay like a spine under the snow. Rowan set her boot on a post and pushed a gap in the wire and steadied it with a stick. The barbs took a thread from her glove. The cut on her palm tugged under the bandage. She did not look down. They reached the far side of Eben's north pasture where the ground pitched up. From there the cabin would have shown if they turned to look. They did not turn. They led the mules into a draw choked with sage and juniper and the sweet dust of old needles. The cold laid a hand on the back of their necks and kept it there. The sound of water in the creek thinned until it was a whisper the size of a coin. The dark came clean. The land took them in. The wire in the satchel knocked once against the knife and fell quiet. The mules placed their feet like priests and did not argue. Eben kept the rifle across his lap. Rowan set her hand on the horn and felt the leather creak under her palm. The sky opened above the draw into a long strip of night. The wind ran it like a bow on a string. Night held the draw like a hand. The mules placed each foot as if the ground might argue. Breath smoked and hung. Frost drew lace on the sage. Rowan led and listened. Eben kept the rifle across his lap and rode with his jaw set against the cold. His fingers cracked where the skin had split on the axe handle. He did not complain. The wind moved overhead and sang along the rim of stone. They kept to low ground when the sky paled. Rowan found a pocket of juniper thick as a nest and brought the mules in nose to tail. They ate cold bacon in small bites and chewed hard biscuits until their jaws ached. Sleep came in fits. When Rowan watched Eben dreamed in whispers and said sorry to no one. When Eben watched Rowan lay still and quiet and did not give anything away. The second night had a harder edge. The pass threw back the wind in a knife. Ice built at the creek in shelves that clicked in the current. Rowan found a spring that did not taste of alkali and cupped water to his mouth. He drank and shook like a dog. She rubbed his hands until life came back and the pain made his eyes water. He laughed once at the sound he made and hid the laugh behind his teeth. They climbed where the land insisted. The mules slid and caught and blew steam. Stars burned close and cold. Eben wore his coat and her rope belt sat under her hand. When the world went blacker than black, he touched her sleeve with 2 fingers, so he knew where she was. She did not shake him off. At a high place, the wind fell away all at once and left a quiet that felt like church. Below them, a string of lights pricked the dark along a flat stretch of earth. Rowan stood with her arm on the mule's neck and took it in. Eben looked and swallowed. He did not call it safe. He did not call it anything. They came down off the ridge along a wash of ash-colored dirt and found a place between rocks to make a small fire. The heat went straight to the bones and made them both a little foolish with relief. Coffee boiled thin and bitter. The first sip made them close their eyes. The second brought them back to sit with their shoulders touching. Eben lifted his hand and touched her cheek with the back of his knuckles. She leaned into it and let her eyes close. The night watched and did not comment. They came together without hurry. It was quiet and sure and not like the barn. When they lay after the fire burned steady and the stars did what stars do. Laramie and winter had smoke that tasted like coal and iron. Trains called across the flats like something wild on a leash. Streets held ruts with ice at the edges. Men who worked the yard moved with their heads down. The money in the tin did not go far. Eben sold the mules to a man with a feed store and came out with coins that felt cold and light in his palm. They found a room and then another beside it, in a clapboard frame near the river. The door closed. The lock clicked. A small iron stove waited in the corner with an elbow of pipe that rattled when the wind shifted. Eben walked to the livery stable and asked for work without dressing it up. The owner looked at his shoulders and then at his hands. He gave him a shovel and a stall and a short nod. Eben learned the rhythm of the place quick. He mucked and hauled and kept his head down. He came home with straw in his hair and the smell of horse in his clothes. He put whatever he was paid on the table and smiled without knowing he was smiling. Rowan walked past the dressmakers and the eating houses and stood in the doorway of Mrs. Whitcomb's millinery. The window held a line of small hats that looked like confections. The bell on the door rang. The owner looked up and took in Rowan's size and Rowan's hands and frowned before she knew she was doing it. Rowan said she could be steady. Mrs. Whitcomb pushed a velvet crown across the table and a length of net and a clutch of pearl beads. Rowan set her fingers and stitched. The line stayed true. The knots lay small and shy. The owner watched without talking. When Rowan finished, she lifted the hat and turned it in the light. She said there would be a day's pay for a day's work. Rowan nodded and sat down and kept going. They bought a second-hand bed with a frame that did not squeal and a blanket thick as felt. They bought a pot that held stew and a tin of coffee that smelled like mornings with rain. On a cold night, Rowan wrapped a strip of cloth around a short run of barbed wire and used it for a curtain rod. She pushed the hooks through and lifted it into the window frame. The wire held. The cloth kept the draft out. Eben laughed at the bit of trick and shook his head and kissed her on the temple. Snow built at the base of their door and did not melt. The world went quiet with it. Eben cleaned the rifle out of habit and oiled the lever until it moved like thought. He set it on the mantel and left it there. Rowan kept a pot going on the stove with potatoes and onion and a bone that gave up slow. She mended his shirts with small, neat stitches, and the cloth obeyed. He brought her a coat that fit her shoulders and sat right along the arms. She stood at the window and tried it on, and the coat made her look like herself and not like a joke. One night the wind came down off the hills and rattled the stovepipe until it sang. Eben sat at the table and polished his hands with a bit of tallow so the cracks would not split again. Rowan stood by the window with the curtain she had made and watched flakes drift into the streetlight glow. She had been quiet for a long stretch. He set the rag down and went to stand behind her. Their faces met in the glass, hers strong and his thin, both a little older than the mirror in his mother's cabin had known. "Do you regret it?" she said. He thought about the cabin and the post with the splinter chewed out of it, and the sound a mule makes when it decides to keep going. He thought about the moment on the ridge when the wind fell and the world held still. "I regret being afraid for so long," he said. He set his palms on her arms and felt the coat under his hands and the muscle under the coat. The stove ticked as it cooled a fraction and then caught itself. Outside, a wagon wheel went past with a small crunch. "I love you, Rowan," he said. The words sat in the air and did not move. Her breath came in like a held note let go. She turned. Her mouth made a shape he knew and did not see often. She put her hands on his waist and pulled him in, sure of the strength she used. She rested her forehead against his and let the quiet do most of the talking. "Then I will grab you every night," she said, "just to remind you." He laughed small and real. The wind pushed at the window and lost. The curtain did its work. The room kept its heat. He held her and she held him, and the old ache in him changed shape into something that fit. Their hands found each other and stayed. The stove breathed, and the night took its place outside like it belonged there. In the morning, there would be stalls to muck and hats to trim, and the walk across ice that sounds like broken glass under boots. For now, the house was a house because they said it was. The bed was a bed because they shared it. The world was the size of 2 rooms and a stove and a window with a wire that did not cut anymore. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.